and thoughts of Senge, I would incorporate right as part of the whole TQM process. I think when we do teaming and so forth, as we get into teams, then we start practicing some of Senge's ideas, for example, on teaming, right at that time.
La siguiente llamada nos llega de la Universidad Autónoma de Tamaulipas, Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas.
Next question is coming from Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas.
¿Sí lo escuchamos?
Question?
¿Tenemos a alguien en la línea? Bueno.
Hello? No,
Se
no.
perdió la llamada. Ahí está.
It's
¿Sí lo
not there.
escuchamos?
No, it's not there.
Bueno, no se escucha, entonces tenemos una pregunta vía fax que nos llega
We
de
have a
Venezuela,
question
de
via
la
fax
Universidad
from
Central de
Venezuela,
Caracas.
Central
Dice,
University,
¿cómo puede una
Caracas.
organización
How can an organization distribute
ampliamente
business
las
responsibility
responsabilidades del negocio
widely
y a la vez
and still
mantener
retain
el control
control?
central?
This is one of those balancing problems that is very difficult to be dealing with in organizations. In part, the organization has to delegate as much authority and responsibility as possible down to the local levels. However, they also need to know and make sure that things are going well and things are going rightly. My suggestion is that for senior management to know intimately what the details are going on in local organizations, and in addition, having a good, tight, accurate information system that will provide them with good feedback and data as to how their local organizations are running.
There are many organizations in the world today that like to operate autonomously. I would like to cite the example of Shell Oil Company. For example, they operate autonomously in many, many countries. They do not have a large corporate staff. What they try to do in Shell and other companies is really, we have to have all of our managers in other countries really share a common vision. It takes a lot of time to really discuss. We also have to share in what is the world reality today. Do we share the same ideas of how the world is changing and how we're going to react to the changes in the world? These kinds of things have to be worked out in discussions very patiently and very persistently.
Recibimos ahora una llamada que proviene del Instituto Tecnológico.
This question is
de
coming
Celaya,
from the Technological Institute of Celaya, Guanajuato, Mexico.
¿Escuchamos, Celaya? Adelante. Hola.
Bueno.
Sí, lo escuchamos.
Sí, ¿me podría explicar más?
Could you explain to me more in detail number 4, that is about the experimenting with different models via computer when you're talking about a change in mental models?
There are a variety of business simulation tools, both in terms of more playful games and also in more serious model simulations on how to run a factory or how to run a business. You can run these particular software again and again and provide a variety of different experiences for people in a very safe, non-threatening environment, as the money that they are winning and losing, in essence, is purely on paper, or in the case of computers, purely electronically. This will allow managers to experience a different way of looking at things in such a way that they can experiment with such without any severe negative consequences to it.
Yes, computer simulations are very important. An example is given of a company that wants to double, maybe to several $1 billion its sales a year, and the approach that's being taken by the rest of the corporation, which is not particularly backed by the vice president of sales, is we'll add 20% more salespeople each year. And of course, 20% more salespeople has to mean that we have to assimilate those people into the business, and in the process of assimilating them, the effectiveness of the existing sales force is going to fall off. The point that I'm making is, yes, computers can help in something like this, and they can point out dramatically over the several years' time what's going to happen. But I think what really Senge is talking about in mental models is the fact that we all approach the table with baggage. We have baggage from years and years of experience in high places, and oftentimes we don't open up in situations, and that has really thwarted the development of a lot of quality decisions. And I think what Senge is pointing out, that we really have to go back to basics. We really have to understand that how people think, how we can draw people out without really concerning them. That what are the ideas or the inferences that caused you to form your thoughts? We have to learn the art of inquiry. And that's what it means to me as far as mental models is concerned. How can we really get dialogue with people, but also improve the art of inquiry?
Muchas gracias. Y ahora de México nos vamos al Perú. Tenemos una llamada
Ahora,
del Instituto
now we have a call
Nacional de
from Peru,
Investigación
from the National
y
Institute of
Capacitación
Research
y
and
Telecomunicaciones en Lima. Bienvenidos.
Training, Telecommunications, Lima.
¿Aló?
Sí, escuchamos, Lima.
Sí. Muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Buenos días.
Reciban cordiales saludos.
Our greetings to you from the Convention Center here, International Convention Center of the INECTEL in Lima, Peru.
El instituto ha convocado a un importante grupo.
Our institute has convened a very important group of professionals and entrepreneurs who are attending this video conference for the first time. And we have two questions for you. How can we change mental models of an administration, of a management? And what policies, what change policies could we apply in an organization that is downsizing, that is reducing its labor force?
And as far as the first question is concerned, in regards to having managers practice different ways of acting, I think in some particular cases it might be good to be setting up some internships as well as an additional experiences in different organizations that act in a different kind of way. This kind of eye-opening experience can be providing very useful input into those individuals wanting to change their mental models. In addition, as Peter Senge described, you can also, in essence, start, challenging the various assumptions that what people have as to how they actually work together. Based on this and based on potentially some new experiences they can generate, they combine this challenging of assumptions with new experiences and incorporate them into a new mental model. In regards to the question of layoffs, that creates a whole separate issue. In essence, is by an organization solely and only laying off its people. In essence, that suggests that there is a lack of system thinking on the part of management. The phrase nowadays in the United States is that organizations are cutting back so much that they are suffering from, to coin a phrase, corporate anorexia. That is, that they are basically starving themselves and getting some short-term benefits, but suffering in the long term. One of the interesting issues when you do have an organization that is suffering from layoffs is that you have violations of expectations on the part of employees. And as a result of this, what can happen is that people are no longer interested in their work, tend to be very defensive, and in essence not really motivated to be providing fully into the organization. They too are going to have to change their mental models in terms of how they deal with the organizations and how they perceive their job as being short-term or long-term. A friend of mine wrote a book last year called Healing the Wounds that describes how people go through layoffs and how to deal with that layoff sickness. I would suggest that might be a useful book to read on the subject in regards to layoffs and the effects on organizations.
Yeah, in changing an organization, the question is, what can I do to start the whole process? And again, I would go right back to leadership. That really what we're trying to do is, of course, motivate our sales force, but really what we continue to say in organizational development, that the leader has to set the environment for the organization. He has to have the vision, and he has to specifically do certain things to make sure the organization is going to be a learning organization. We have to take a look at our policies and procedures. We have to elect what intervention programs, perhaps training and so forth, that have to be adopted. So the leader is very key in the whole process. Regarding the second part of the question, layoffs, having been through corporations that have laid off, it's very important that even during a layoff period that we start these same processes. We have the survivors. The survivors have to be worked with. They are a bit shell-shocked and so forth. So if we create visions for them that this is what we had to do and this is where we're going, it really is a morale booster and also sets the corporation back on the right track for the future.
Tenemos una pregunta ahora, nuevamente vamos a México.
Now we have a question from Mexico, coming from the Autonomous University, Hispano-American University.
Le escuchamos.
Buenos días, saludos desde México.
Good morning. Greetings to you from Mexico. Our question is for Dr. Chaudron. What applications in Mexico and Latin America are in place already that you know of, and what are their results?
As far as Latin America itself is concerned, I'm not really sure. There are a number of international operations of larger organizations such as Shell and so on, and AT&T. Outside of the local organizations of those global competitors, I'm not exactly certain. George?
No, I have really nothing more to add except perhaps the multinationals. They may have gone in and received training through headquarters and so forth, but I'm not sure of any local organizations that have adopted these kind of things.
Muchas gracias y viajamos ahora
Much, and now we are going to Panama. Thanks to telecommunications, and we are now in Panama, Technological University, Panama. The question is the following. The country is going through a privatization period. What real experiences have you faced in public institutions applying these re-engineering concepts and systems thinking?
That is indeed a significant change in one's mental model, because one is not only going from a problem-solving approach to a systems thinking approach, one is also going from, in essence, a non-profit orientation to a profit-making orientation. Both of those are, if you will, two major concerns that organizations will have a significant problem dealing with. The issue about government subsidies and such, in essence, going away, all of the various political institutions that what happened as a result are going to have to change rather significantly.
As you know, in our country, we're going through the cycle now where large governments are not very popular. And as a result, many of our governments, even here in Orange County, are taking a look at all the functions they perform to see what they can do to offload those to private enterprise. Oftentimes what happens is, of course, a private enterprise will come in. They may hire the government employees, but they're going to operate under completely new standards. There's going to be a profit motive to things. We seem to be assimilating these kind of ideas quite well. We haven't noticed any large problems, but of course it has to have been very selected how we did this.
Gracias. Y de Panamá nos trasladamos ahora a Bolivia. La siguiente pregunta nos llega de la Universidad Privada Boliviana.
Next question is coming from Bolivia, Cochabamba, Bolivia.
La pregunta es la siguiente.
And the question is as follows.
In Bolivia, estamos cambiando de una
we are changing. We're going from a centralized political administration to a decentralized administration. I would like to know if you can orient us how to apply the fifth discipline to correctly structure a new regional government. And also, I wanted to know if we could have the name and address of a speaker, an expert speaker, who could talk to us about decentralization, because we would like to invite this person to lecture here in Cochabamba, Bolivia, if you happen to know. Thank you.
In regards to this issue about decentralization, it's a difficult issue, but it really boils down to two questions. One is that what functions should be performed at all? There may be a variety of different things that, in essence, no local organization or central organization should do. Then the next question is that who can best efficiently, in essence, perform that particular service? If the local areas all have very different needs for this particular service, it probably would not be serviced very well by a central organization. On the other hand, if the same function is be performed in one place as another place, and there really is no local variation to that, then it very well might be performed centrally. In regards to speaker engagements and such, what I would suggest that you do is to contact the International Training Center, Dr. Cardenas, and make arrangements through that.
Interesting issue that you raised right there. The point is that we could get into one of these contests between two different groups, and that's the kind of a thing we would like to avoid. I back very much what Dave has said. There's really a need for people to get together, to rationally take a look at the functions, function by function, to engage in dialogue and come to some kind of an agreement of what should be put out in the regions and what should be put centrally. But we also have to deal, of course, in things like this. There's tradition. There are ways things have been done in the past. So we have to also be very alert of mental models, and perhaps it would be useful for people to understand mental models and how to approach change when those mental models exist.
La siguiente pregunta la formulan del Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic, Nayarit, México. La escuchamos. Sí, adelante.
Sí, buenos días. Tenemos una pregunta del Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic.
We have a question from the Technological Institute from Tepic, Nayarit, Mexico. Good morning. My question is mainly related to businesses who are right now going through an economic crisis due to a very serious problem in the markets. And so in this case, it's very important to have a team of workers who are very cohesive. But it's also very true that enterprises are very vulnerable because we don't always have immediate results. And sometimes we do have to downsize because we are faced with reality. So my question is, how can we keep a cohesive team faced with these in the midst of this situation? And also, how can we apply the fifth discipline? And can you tell us some examples of cases like this before and what the results have been, particularly in the area of human resources?
Dealing with this issue of cohesive teams in times of crisis is a real problem. Teams, in essence, might have one or two reactions to this. One of which is that they realize that they're going through a crisis. Everyone comes together, works through the issues, and gets through it. What very often happens, though, is that the team simply just decay, go through a lot of backfighting and infighting in terms of what they want to do. As much as possible, those kind of issues need to be dealt with as early as possible in the crisis. And the group must be helped through various team-building exercises to help to come together before the crisis actually becomes any worse. If those issues are delayed, they in essence make the crisis all the worse.
Take a look at where our workers are coming from, regardless of country. Many times workers do not have a total view of the company, and this has been one of the weaknesses, particularly in our country. The more advanced companies right now are trying to give our people, try to turn our workers a little bit more into a more of a business approach. We want people in our companies to understand holistically the total environment of the company, how it works and so forth. When we have people who've been raised to that level, then we can do a lot of things. We can explain what we're doing and so forth. When we talk about a learning organization, we want an open organization, and we have to be open of what's going on. But there's very logical reasons why we have to do things which we have to do. But there has to be improved communication and a sharing of ideas with our stakeholders, our employees.
La pregunta siguiente la formulan desde la Universidad del Valle de Atemayac.
Our question is coming from Atemayac, Mexico.
¿Sí?
Bueno.
Hola, siga, por favor.
Bien, la pregunta es de
The question comes from Guadalajara, the University Guadalajara. If we to change the mental models of the university leaders doesn't seem to be easy or feasible at all, particularly because the leaders are very powerful. What do you do in order to overcome this problem, power problem? Do you have any recipe?
The first realization one has to come to is that you're hungry. Senior management, whether they're in a university or elsewhere, need to realize that there is a significant problem in terms of how they're currently dealing with the situation. If they don't realize that, it will be a long uphill road as to how actually they are going to be successfully going through this. if one can provide examples to them as far as other organizations and how they've successfully done, if one can increase the sense of crisis that they feel by letting them know on how badly off the particular university is, that may help. But ultimately, they have to come to the realization themselves, and you cannot force them.
Having worked for both Cal State University Long Beach and Cal State University Fullerton, like a typical university, we're undergoing significant change. Change in universities is extremely difficult. We have a few universities in our country that have really done tortuously some remarkable changes. For one thing, the curriculums that we teach right now, we know in the next 8 to 10 years, have to go through dramatic change. We have to teach teaming and these kind of things. Now, as far as specific names are concerned, University of Alabama has done an excellent job. As far as another specific name is concerned, Bob Maxson, who is now the president of the Cal State Long Beach area, came from the University of Alabama, and he could cite, for example, the experiences they went through. It was a torturous process in their School of Business Administration, but they did get through it. It took them probably about 3 or 4 years. But they did get the backing of the faculty, for example, in the new curriculum, and all of them participated in coming up with it.
La siguiente participación proviene de Cementos Apasco en Macos,
The next participation is coming from Tabasco, Mexico. Good morning. Well, when the personnel is given the opportunity to participate in the changes taking place in the organization and they don't respond to that, how advisable do you think is to impose it? Or what reactions would you expect from people who are used to working with methods, old methods, and because they've been there for many, many years?
That really has to be a management decision. If you have relatively little time in which to make the change, management must make the choice of taking longer and trying to develop a consensus among all of employees as to what to do, or simply saying, we're going in this direction, and anyone who wants to come along come with us. For those of us who are not interested in coming along, goodbye.
Specific experiences on that. Xerox Corporation, for example, I think you all know in our country, and they were faced with a survival scene, and they had to launch into organizational development on a hurry-up basis. There were many of their senior presidents that just didn't go along with it. In their particular case, because this, of course, was the first time through, they put up with it for a while. But if you talk to them now, they said that really the biggest mistake they made was by keeping those people on board. They slowed up the whole process. So really what we're learning from the experiences here, if you run into people in key positions that cannot go along with the program, then you may have to make other arrangements for them.
Escuchamos ahora la pregunta que nos hacen vía telefónica desde el Instituto Tecnológico Superior.
Next question is coming from Apantzingan, Michoacán, Mexico.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Nuestra pregunta es la siguiente.
Our question is the following. Apart from the mentality and self-esteem, what other obstacles would you consider that are most common amongst people and that are resisting change, and what can we do about it, particularly when you're talking about an underdeveloped system?
Perhaps one of the greatest fears that what people have are really two things, I suppose. One of which is purely and simply the fear of uncertainty. That can be dealt with by communicating with them as quickly and as clearly as possible. The second kind of issue is a more complex one, and that is that in any organizational change, there are going to be winners in the power game and losers in the power game. And in essence, those particular people whose power is threatened will probably become quite resistant to whatever particular change is going on, even though it may be better for the organization as a whole.
The comment that runs through my mind, of course, is technology. We're talking about undeveloped systems and that kind of thing, and that really there's a lot of very wonderful technological systems. And the problem that I have is how can we get this information? It's quite possible in undeveloped lands to leapfrog, to really take advantage of some of the newer things that are being done. We're seeing this happen all over the world, with China perhaps putting in fiber optics and that kind of thing. So it's a question of how we can introduce some of these new technologies and make some of these undeveloped systems far more competitive.
Damos cabida ahora a una llamada telefónica que viene
And now
de
this
la
other question is
Universidad
coming
Nacional
via
Autónoma de
phone,
México,
coming
Facultad
from
de
the
Medicina
Autonomous
Veterinaria,
University in
Zootecnia
Mexico,
en México, Distrito Federal.
Federal District.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Habla la doctora Rocío Serrano.
I am Dr.
Tengo dos
Rocio
preguntas.
Serrano. I have two questions for you.
¿Hacia dónde se dirigirán las organizaciones?
Where will
después de la
organizations
quinta disciplina?
lead? Where are organizations going after the fifth discipline? And what is the average
de
time
cambio a nivel
that would be the appropriate
de una
one
empresa
for a
o de un
change for an organization or a country? Thank you.
It really depends upon the need for change. If there is a clear and present danger, to use the phrase, in essence, the organization can be changed within 2 to 3 years. On the other hand, if it really is that a lot of people are uncertain about whether the change is necessary, and the organization is very large, very structured, and very entrenched in terms of what it's doing, you probably are talking about the line of 5 to 10 years.
We agree that business and government organizations are going through a very significant transition period. We see this in TQM. The new textbooks and the new works in the universities all are pointing out what lies beyond TQM, what lies beyond the fifth discipline. And really, those kind of terms will be dropped when all of us accept that these are the management principles that we're going to follow in the future. That's why I think the universities have a great responsibility to make sure that the managers of the 1990s are well equipped and trained with these new types of management philosophies.
Another question via telephone coming from Zacatecas, Mexico. Good morning. My name is Máximo Herrera Esparza, and I am from Zacatecas. How do you apply the fifth discipline in a society that has a different culture, labor culture, as from that of the United States, for instance, Mexico, Guatemala, or Latin America in general? Do we have to implement a re-engineering systems, orienting ourselves to that kind of culture? What would be the difference here?
This whole issue of cultures tends to be a very difficult one to deal with. For those cultures that are relatively close to the United States, it will be somewhat easier. For those cultures, in essence, that have very little contact, in essence, with Western management techniques, it may be somewhat more difficult. Kind of the key to this, though, is to realize that despite whatever training one might get, despite whatever seminars might one go to, each organization has to customize this to what their particular needs are. There is no grand solution that will apply to every place without at least some custom tweaking and custom training that is going to have to be necessary to do.
In our country, we're, as you know, a very diverse country. We have companies with very strong labor unions. And we also have companies with no labor unions. Regardless of whether you have one or don't, the change still has to be implemented. Our companies in the various environments they find themselves in have had to react. And of course that willingness in most areas will be shared. But we have plants up in Sacramento and so forth, very strong UAW, that kind of thing, and there's been successful implementation. I really don't think that this culture thing is really, it's important. But basically there are innate human desires to get things done. And what we're talking about here really deals with some basic motivations on the part of people, regardless of culture.
La siguiente pregunta viene nuevamente de Panamá.
Next question is coming from Panama.
Escuchamos.
Buenos días otra vez.
Good morning again.
En cuanto al enfoque por sistemas,
as far as systems thinking in an organization, what do you think could be the priority order in each system in order to start a process of change?
To my mind, the first thing what one must need to deal with is the intergroup dynamics of senior management and how they deal with situations. To my mind, that is the first thing that would in essence have to be done. The second particular aspect after that would then be dealing with the long